Hi, and welcome to this video where I will be talking about intuition. It's a widely used term and maybe even sometimes overused, and it's common knowledge that grandmasters usually have very good intuition. And when people speak about intuition, they normally think about the feeling the player has about a certain move being right. And this being right means being right in that particular position because it answers the demands of that position. And this is true, but in this video I will talk about a different aspect of chess intuition. You will soon see what I have in mind. So the position you see here was played against a relatively decent player. I think he was rated around 2200 FIDE. I was playing white, and from the pawn structure you can probably deduce that the opening was a advanced French, where I kind of mixed up my preparation, but I still got a decent position. However, I continued to play lazily, I have to admit, and I allowed my opponent to develop his pieces in a very harmonious way. And in spite of me having the pair of bishops, black here has pretty good play. The reason for this is that my bishops are pretty passive. They are not doing much. And black's pieces are all very well placed. So the knights are controlling the center. The bishop and the queen are very nicely located, and all these things mean that my position doesn't feel comfortable. So I don't have any clear plans, whereas black can continue to play natural normal moves, let's say a5, b4, hit my bishop on c3, go bishop c5, put pressure on f2, and so on. So this was a situation where I spent a lot of time because I had to pay the price for this lazy play, leading to this point where I allowed my opponent to have this comfortable play. Also, don't forget this idea of knight h4, hitting the bishop on f3, and when the bishop moves, f2 is exposed, and so on. A lot of arrows and squares here, so I'll quickly just remove them when I start speaking about the moves I considered. So I spent a lot of time here. I was checking different moves, and mostly I was trying to defend against black's plan of a5 and b4. So I checked the move like knight b4. Looked reasonable, but especially as my pieces feel a bit constrained and pretty passive, so it made some sense to exchange some of them. But after knight b4, bishop b4, bishop b4, queen b4, rook a8, black's pretty comfortable. Controlling the c file, there is rook c4 coming, his knight is not worse at all than my bishop. My bishop is still pretty passive, so I didn't look too promising. Another move I checked was b3, the idea being to free the b2 square for the bishop, and after something like, let's say, b4, bishop b2, rook a d8 now is what I didn't quite like, because there is this idea of d4 further limiting my pieces. There is also bishop c5, still with the idea of going against the f2 pawn. Didn't feel great either. The move a3 stops b4, but after a5 the threat is emerging again. So, well, I haven't done much. So what happened here is very interesting, because as I was kind of calculating and checking these lines, I had this flash of intuition. And by flash of intuition, again, I would say it's not so much about the move being right in the sense of that it's the positionally correct move, even though the move is not bad. But in fact, I intuited that my opponent will fall into a trap. And this is a very interesting type of intuition, very useful one as well. You shouldn't abuse it, because it may not happen. So you shouldn't really be playing bad moves just because you have a feeling that your opponent would fall into a trap. You should never do that. But when possible, you should play moves that are positionally sound and that contain traps, especially if you then get the feeling that the opponent would fall into it. And this is in fact what happened in the game. So what happened in the game was I played the move b4, stopping b4, and enticing my opponent with the following variation. I have to note that my opponent was in time trouble by this point already, even though it's only move 18. He had around 5 minutes to reach move 40. So this was another factor that increased the chances of my opponent falling into the trap. This meant that the next moves that black can play can be played pretty quickly. And when people are in time trouble, they tend to play quickly. So I was kind of getting this feeling that he may not notice the trap, especially if he moves quickly. As it turned out, my intuition was spot on. So the following moves were played very quickly. b4, a5, natural, attacking the pawn on b4, a3, take on b4, take on b4. All natural by black, opening the a file. And now he played very quickly the move rook a2. And this is what I was counting on. So before showing the conclusion of the game, which you may also see in the notation, a quick note that in fact rook a4 was better. So this puts the b4 pawn under more pressure. And black still has ideas like, let's say, rook d8 and d4, and d4 being the main idea, hitting that bishop and exposing the pawn on b4. My intention here was rook b1, prophylactically defending that pawn on b4. But what I calculated contained a hole, and I will show it to you. So I looked at d4, bishop takes c6, this was my intended line, dc3, and now queen d7. During the game, this looked kind of promising because I activated my pieces. b4 is protected for now. I am threatening queen e6. But what I missed, in fact, here is the move rook a6, which we also missed in the post-mortem when we looked at this game. A difficult move because, as you know, moves going backwards are the easiest one to miss. And the point is that the bishop is hanging, and now when the bishop moves after rook d8, the queen is trapped. So you see my calculation contained this serious hole, and honestly, I cannot guarantee that I would have seen it had black played the move rook a4. It happens, grandmasters don't always calculate precisely or without blunders in their calculations. After rook a4, the best move actually is bishop g4, but the position remains unclear. For example, now d4 is not so good because after exchanges on d4, everything exchanged on d4, bishop b4, bishop b6, white wins a pawn. That is the idea of bishop g4. I have to say I didn't see this. I'm not even sure if I considered bishop g4 during the game. This was discovered when I analyzed the game. So after bishop g4, black should play king h8, and now something like g3, and the position remains somewhat murky, and both sides have difficulties making progress. The bishop on g4 makes the move rook d8 less desirable because then bishop f5 would kind of rattle black structure, then maybe e6 is possible and so on. But again, it's a complex position with unclear play. So objectively, this would have been best played by both sides. But going back to the game, as my intuition correctly predicted, my opponent played rook a2, and I immediately smashed bishop d5. So this was the trick I actually saw when I was thinking over my 18th move, b4. This is the trick, of course. Point being that e d5, queen d5 is a check, and an attack on the rook on a2, and white wins material. And the best part about this is that my opponent was so shocked when he saw this bishop d5 that, being in time trouble, he quickly played rook c2, but immediately resigned, because he saw that I can take on e6 with check and then take the pawn on, take the rook on c2. So I was lucky because I won the game so quickly, only 3 moves from the position where I wasn't very content with how things were on the board. So my intuition really brought me a quick victory this time. But objectively speaking, things are not clear cut here. Yes, white has an advantage, but the game could have continued. So after rook c2, bishop b6, king h8, queen c2. If my opponent had a bit of more presence, he would have likely seen that black can play the move rook knight cd4 with a double attack. Yeah, the queen and the bishop on e6. And now after bishop takes d4, knight d4, white is forced to give back the exchange. Rook takes d4, queen takes d4, g3 to open a luft, bishop b4, and okay, the game goes on. Yes, white is a pawn up, that is true, but the opposite colored bishops and the presence of queens and rooks and okay, maybe some pressure against f2 means that black is by no means lost, yeah, or at least immediately lost. Long term, I still think that white should somehow win, especially if exchanging queens and then expanding f4, f5 and so on, as that pawn on b5 can easily be controlled. So white would be basically 2 pawns up on the king side, but the game would have continued. So for example, rook e4, queen c5, rook e2, and then again hoping to exchange queens and so on. So this should have continued objectively, but as you saw, my opponent panicked and just resigned, yeah, on the spot. So this is sometimes how intuition can show itself. In this case, it was a mix of playing a move that wasn't positionally bad. It was a normal move in the position, b4, stopping black's expansion on the queen side, but also a move that contained the trap and the intuition nicely whispering, yeah, that black would actually fall into that trap. So in your games, keep in mind and be aware, yeah, listen to your intuition, what it's telling you, not only about the position, but also about your opponent, about his state, about his inclinations, about what he's about to do. So, thanks for watching this video. Hope you liked it, enjoyed it, learned something new. If you liked it, subscribe, share, and keep on watching. See you in the next one.